Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of F and Doc TV. If you're listening, hit the like, share, and subscribe for more videos. I know it's been a while. I've taken a little sabbatical off of here, but I'm uploading another video for this month. I have another video to follow up on this current video that I'm doing right now. But the subscriber base is growing. I just got 8 subscribers, so to that 8th subscriber, thank you for subscribing and thank you for tuning into F and Doc TV. I hope to grow this channel, and anybody listening to this video podcast, just share my videos and hit the like so that my videos could get recommended in the algorithm and I could continue to grow this channel. This channel cannot grow without subscribers like you. And the more of you that subscribe, the more likes that I get on the videos, the more my channel can continue to grow. So to my subscribers, thank you for sticking with me, and also thank you for listening to my message. And I hope that you can stick around because I got more in store for a lot of people. Um, I know this news is kind of a month old, but it took me some time to really reflect on what the current situation is in America. Um, right now, we're talking about the Bronx fires, and also the fire that happened in Philadelphia that claimed the lives of 12 people, and also claim also here in Baltimore claimed the lives of 3 firefighters. You're seeing so many fires during the winter months, and you know this goes back to an issue about housing in America and the dilapidation of housing across America. Right now we have a housing shortage right now, and unfortunately that housing shortage isn't going anywhere. Houses are going up, and finding quality housing is kind of become more difficult. But in this current situation that I'm about to delve into, um, I really wanted to talk about this issue with New York City and Philadelphia, and also my city, Baltimore, where we've seen ill equipped housing, and yet the American government that you consistently elect on a daily basis does not really care about the current situation in America. Right now, we're focused so much on Russia and so much on what's going on outside of our country. And I feel like it's become a pattern and a habit. You know, with things opening back up, with COVID going down, now we're grappling with yet another invasion, another war. And what's so odd about that is while all of this is going on, we're seeing the crumbling of American infrastructure, especially when it deals with housing, and also housing in New York City, which has become a troubling trend. Now, about a few weeks ago, there was a fire in the Bronx that claimed over 17 people in the Tremont section of the Bronx. And on top of that, we also had another devastating fire that claimed the lives of 13 people in Northeast Philly. There was also one in Baltimore, which had a row home that caught on fire maybe close to like 3 times. That claimed the lives of 3 firefighters. There's an issue in the media. We talk about all these fires in the United States, and the worst fires are the ones that happen during the winter. Space heater fires. But what often is not talked about with the issue of fires and fire safety is the issue of an aging housing stock in America. When you look at the South Bronx, and the South Bronx, you know, it's been known as, it has a reputation that precedes itself. You know, when anybody thinks about the Bronx, they always think about some of the worst fires in American history. You get this image of the Bronx that is rooted in a past that they're trying to run away from, but can't get away from. You know, the deadliest fires in New York City happen in the Bronx. And even now they're talking about it. And I've said this so many times, anytime I turn on the TV or, basically turn on YouTube, I see, you know, they have these YouTube channels that focus on the FDNY. And a majority of all the fires that happen, most of the time, they happen in the Bronx. Some of the deadliest fires happen in the Bronx. I mean, who could forget Happy Land? Even if you ask a firefighter in New York City, a veteran firefighter, a lot of people will say, one of the deadliest fires that firefighters had to fight in the Bronx was the Happy Land fire. It claimed so many people, and that was in 1990. There's been an issue about the Bronx that most people don't want to talk about, and most of the time they don't want to talk about it because, as I've stated before, the reputation of the Bronx kind of precedes itself. No matter what nice things happen in the Bronx to other people who have never been there, including me, we will always see it as the Bronx is burning. We'll always have that picture in our minds that most people set fires because they need insurance money, and most of the time people set fires to their apartments because they need insurance money. And that's sometimes the viewpoint that a lot of people about New York City have with the Bronx. But my case in point that I really want to get to the meat of is, the hypocrisy of the United States. When we talk about all the ills and social ills and the social problems in the United States, there's always this contradiction that comes along with politicians. And one of those issues is, months we talked about Build Back Better. We talked about having an infrastructure bill. And the problem with that is that a lot of these politicians, they promise one thing And then the complete opposite happens. And I think one of the biggest problems is, when it comes to how we see Joe Biden, is he really looking out for the best interests of American citizens like us? And mainly the ones that put him in office in the first place. When it comes to politics, money is one of the biggest factors that drive an election. But it's also the fact that we don't really hold politicians accountable for what they say in the media or the promises that they make. One of the biggest problems that, politicians have is that they'll stop in a town, they'll give a peppery speech, and then they'll ask for votes, and then nothing else will happen. And we're living in a time period where we don't want to really address the issue of the contradictions and the hypocrisy that comes along with being a politician. Because at the end of the day, people have been telling us for years, votes matter, you need to get out and vote. But then what often happens is your situation stays the same. And no politician is guaranteed to really focus on, how would I say this? They're not guaranteed to focus on your problem and your issue. And I think that's one of the issues that I have with the Biden administration. New York City has had issues with housing for the past 10 years, and mainly with the New York City Housing Authority, which will be almost 90 years old in a couple of years. 90 years old. And yet, out of all of that, there hasn't been improvements in the housing in New York City. You have so many people who live in the projects, that live in public housing complexes, and nothing has gotten done. And, everybody says, okay, well, is it a federal issue or is it the issue of the city? When in reality, New York City Housing Authority is one of the largest public housing authorities in the United States. Probably, Chicago Housing Authority is probably the second one. But the thing that makes New York Housing Authority unique is that a large crop of public housing is still up in most parts of New York City. Whereas though everybody else, especially Chicago, has gotten rid of public housing towers, New York City still has housing projects that reach almost maybe 20, 29 floors. If you look around, especially in Philadelphia and also Baltimore, along with New York City, most of the time you'll see on your block deteriorating housing. And to me, that's one of the most problematic things about the United States. How can you call yourself the richest country in America and yet prophesies that America is the greatest country in the world, but yet your housing stock is and your housing infrastructure is crumbling. Now you can't blame that on liberal or Democrat. It doesn't. It's not a party politics thing. This is a humanitarian issue. This is a humanitarian thing. You have immigrants that come to this country to get away from their country because they think America is a better country. And so many immigrants, and that's a funny thing, so many immigrants come to this country and they think that the conditions are actually better. And I noticed something about immigrants too that is quite problematic, is that when they come here they say, well, you have it good in my country. We have a socialist government and we can't do anything, and if you speak out you get shot. And most of the time when we think about those issues, especially with Africans and Caribbean people, because there's a large number of Caribbean people that live in New York City that immigrated from their country of origin to the United States because they thought that they would have better opportunities. And then they come here and they say, well, America's a great place. It's just you just don't take advantage of the opportunities. And they say stuff like this to, you know, black Americans. Oh, you don't engage, or you don't take advantage of the opportunities that were given to you. You're a lazy American. You get that. And I'm going to delve into that in the next video about, the idea of work. That's going to be another video, so I'm going to put a footnote in that. But to come back to my main point, you have so many people that want to run into this country that they don't understand how hard it is to live in the United States and what it means to really be an American. To be an American is often seen as something great around other countries. It's a bargaining chip. But there are so many Americans, even right now, that feel a sense of discontentment with how they're being treated. And they're not saying it outright. And even I wouldn't say it. I wouldn't say it outright. But there's a level of discontentment amongst Americans right now that politicians do not see. And if politicians do not choose to see that and hear those voices come back with frustration. And those voices also come in the form of dissent. And sometimes that dissent could come in the form of words of violence. And I think in the United States right now we have a troubling conflict. There's going to be a high level of dissent waiting in the wind in the next couple of months. And I believe that dissent is going to be very strong amongst the American people. And we're starting to see it right now. And how people express that dissent will start to continue to redefine American politics. Because if you look in other countries, nobody should have to struggle to find decent housing and safe housing. But we unfortunately are fighting just to find housing, decent housing in the United States. And housing, unfortunately, should be a human right, a basic human right. But you start to see more homeless people. You're starting to see people who refuse to live out on the streets, would rather live in dilapidated housing. And it comes at the price of them losing their lives because of a fire or because their landlord didn't keep the heat on. And that's one of the most troubling things about the United States right now. We want to go to war, or we're forced to go to war, but yet we're in an internal war at home when it comes to having the basic necessities of life. If you can't get the basic necessities of life, then something is truly wrong. You live in the most wealthiest country in America. You live in the most wealthiest country in the world. And yet, your housing looks like it hasn't improved in over 80 years. And that's what's really troubling about this situation with the fires. Especially in a place where I live, like Baltimore City. And Baltimore has almost 27,000 row homes that are vacant. 27,000 vacant buildings. Some of that is cut down to 19,000. Some cannot be recouped by the city because they are landlords that have sat on these houses for years and never really improved them. And that's one of the issues. Like, even in Baltimore, you have a predominantly black government. And we've had one since 1987. But yet, the urban conditions haven't improved since the 90s. When it came to public housing and how bad public housing, Baltimore had its fight with public housing. And we got rid of public housing because of the problems that it created. New York City still has that problem. They've maintained these tall buildings. They've maintained these structures for years. And yet, when they catch on fire, it claims the lives of people. It's like being in a hot box. And what's so troubling about this situation is there's so many people that have no other choice but live there because the rent is too high in the city. And New Yorkers and people in Philadelphia, they're being priced out of just the simple amenities because of the mainly because of landlords, mainly because of housing that hasn't improved, and yet the federal government refuses to acknowledge. We talk about Build Back Better. And yet housing has not become the center of attention in terms of public policy because the federal government doesn't want to address it. We haven't had an upgrade in housing since the Great Depression. And yet, with all these houses, it's driving up the price. A 3 bedroom now is $350,000. That's the average for a 3 bedroom home. And yet, you know, and this is the funny thing about New York City, because I've been to New York City so many times, and I truly love New York City, but I hate what it's become since 9/11. It's become a dual city, and I think it's always been that way since after 9/11, because there are certain people that really want to live in the city but can't afford to, and choose to live in incomplete housing and make those major sacrifices. And this is supposed to be a great country, but nobody can afford housing anymore. My generation can't even afford housing, and that's troubling. And you can say what you want. Oh, it's because Americans are lazy. They don't work hard enough. They don't. They spend too much money on luxury stuff and phones and lattes and guacamole, and all this other shit. Like you have a whole generation, older generation, that feels as though the younger generation, the reason why they can't afford housing is because they spend too much money on luxury things. But the truth is that even when you have two jobs, you still are below the median living standard. I have so many friends that work at Target, can barely afford their apartment. You know, and everybody talks about, fight for 15, but now $15 is now minimum wage because of inflation. So now we're back at square one. You know, so unfortunately, when it comes to New York City, you have contradictions all around with New York City. One in which New York City builds a lot of tall buildings, and then another New York City that is represented as, people are working class and middle class, and yet cannot afford the basic amenities in the city. And this is not just about New York City, but it's also about America as a whole. You go to California, there are people living in tents. Skid Row has existed since the 1980s. And yet, Skid Row has become a part of the American tapestry to represent homelessness. And now with New York City also, and especially with Washington D.C., they all have homeless problems. We've been talking about the issue of poverty since the 60s. And yet, the standard of living continues to go up for the average American. But the inequalities cut deep when it comes to housing. Maybe if Joe Biden lived in a tent for a night, he would understand this. But like so many other politicians, as I've said, they stop in a town, give a speech, move on, and do the exact same thing. Jimmy Carter did it, Reagan did it. We haven't had improvements in housing since the mid-90s. The only politician that actually focused on housing policy was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton at least had the Hope 4 program. Hope 4 program focused on urban development and fixing America's housing crisis. Why is it that we don't have politicians that are willing to build on that? That's what's so troubling about this. Housing hasn't improved since the 90s. It's been 30 years. 29 years to be exact. And housing hasn't improved. And public housing in New York City has been a crisis for over 4 years. Didn't start getting back into the media until now. But what's crazy is it's been in the media for a very long time, but nobody nationally didn't want to focus on it until a tragedy like this happened. And just like Baltimore and Philadelphia, our housing stock should not look the way it looks. And that's one of the biggest tragedies of this whole situation. Housing in Baltimore shouldn't be representative of America. That would be considered a national emergency. And Baltimore's housing stock kind of looks like the London Blitz, unfortunately. If you don't know what that is, you look it up yourself. Housing all across America, from Detroit to New York City and Chicago, looks run down. Yet politicians go to these cities asking you and begging you to vote for them because they feel like they have the solution. But they don't. Safe and affordable housing should be a constitutional right. And what we saw back in January with the media focusing in on the Bronx fires, it was a tone-deaf response to a pressing issue. No house, and I mean in every state no house should cost over $400,000. A 3-bedroom community should not cost the average citizen $300,000 to live. There's a problem, and the problem that continues to produce these unaffordable houses. One of the main issues is the problem with the construction industry and how they produce houses. As you know, we have a lumber shortage, but yet we still build houses with lumber and brick and cement because it's the most efficient way to build a house. But the truth of the matter is that housing, there are more efficient ways to build houses that could significantly cut down the cost, but we don't want to try that yet. And that's what's so troubling about this issue. We have this producing of mega mansions in America, or these mini mansions, if you like to call it that. You know, I saw a TV special on CNBC. I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a TV show about this mansion that was built in Los Angeles that cost $237 million. I don't know anybody that would pay that much for a house with 3 swimming pools, 27 bathrooms, and 10 bedrooms. I don't understand that. But the person, the developer that built the house, he won't be able to pay off his debt because he built such an expensive house that nobody really wants to buy it on the market. He was priced out the whole entire market. So what's so funny is you have all these big designs and these grand designs about public housing. Not just public housing, but you have all these grand mansions in places like Los Angeles and Las Vegas and New York City. But then at the same token, what's so problematic is you have all these places being built for millions of dollars, and yet the average house in a neighborhood, the average American is priced out of it. You know, the thing about traditional American housing is that it takes up so much space. You know, the land around the house costs more than the house itself. So when you buy it, and I still don't understand why people still buy houses, because deep down houses are a liability. I know people say, well, you know, houses help build equity, but the truth is, from my opinion, houses are it's a money pit. Drags down everything. You put your money in it, You pay the bank, you get a promissory note and a mortgage, you pay off the mortgage. But over time, once you sign a contract, 30-year mortgage, you can't go anywhere. You're kind of financially chained to that house until you've paid it off. Now, who in their right mind would want to chain themselves to a contract in a bank just to pay off a house? I think it's a crazy way of doing things. But even in the grand scheme of things, we have to make a choice between owning a home and living in dilapidated housing that other people own but refuse to maintain. And that's what's so troubling about this generation, is that you have so many landlords, but they don't want to keep up the property. And people rent at these properties and then they get kicked out when they don't pay the rent and raise up the rent to pay off the mortgage. But home ownership, really, housing should be a constitutional right. There should not be so many homeless people in America. But there also should not be poor housing in America. Biggest question is what happens next. Like I said, there's two ways to express dissent. There's a violent way and a non-violent way to express dissent in your government. Because they're not taking the problem seriously. And unless they start taking it seriously, things will continue to stay the same. Sometimes, and I hate to say this that way, sometimes the only dissent that you have in your arsenal is violent dissent. Because maybe it gets politicians to pay attention and not play around with other people's lives. Now, I'm not advocating, I'm not advocating doing something violent to politicians, but it may just go back to what it was in the 1960s. And we can see that right now, but it's just brewing in the wind. Sometimes dissent is good, but the way you express it, that depends on the person that feels like their own government doesn't hear them. And that's where all the trouble starts. When are we all going to see the light? When are we all going to see the light about American politics? How it's leaving even those on the opposing side destitute and broken. This isn't a Democrat, Republican, left wing, or right wing conservative thing. This is a human rights thing. This is something that really should not exist. in the United States, but continues to. So my question is, are you going to see the light? Or are you going to continue to let American politics leave you broken? And how do you express that dissent and that rage to get these politicians to stop playing with your livelihoods? Hit the like, share, and subscribe, and continue to fight indoctrination. I'm Tony J. I'm out. Peace.